Joining me now is Matt Olney, Director of Talos Threat Intelligence and Interdiction at Cisco. Matt, welcome to the news desk. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're here to talk about threat intelligence and the global threat landscape. In looking at the global landscape, why don't we start with your perspective on how the role of threat intelligence has evolved over the years?
I mean, yeah, so you kind of go back to some of the early reports. You know, you had sites that tracked CVEs and you were trying to track the individual threats, and then there was sort of the APT1 report, which is sort of like the foundational sort of opening of threat actor tracking. Then you got into commercial entities creating different threat monitoring systems. Now you've got major corporations building their own in-house intelligence teams. So it's not, it's not just for government work anymore. It's not just for vendors. There's intelligence activity across the board, and so the other major place that we're seeing changes recently is in the vendor government kind of space, where we're like, how do our intelligence organizations in the vendor space work with national security organizations globally? And so organizations like CISA, which is now headed by Director Easterly, are the kind of places that are now really understanding that when you're trying to combat cybersecurity issues at a national level, it really takes a whole of economy effort to kind of do that work.
Thanks for that. I'm also curious how organizations are using threat intelligence, and if you could also address how that's changed since the early days that you just described as well, I think would be useful.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very much part of the security maturity process. So there are lots of organizations that have no in-house intelligence capability. Then there's organizations that pull in intelligence feeds from different sources and sort of monitor those. Organizations that are in particular verticals are working with their ISACs to provide intelligence. So like if you're in election security, for example, there's the election infrastructure ISAC. So they have special sets of intelligence for them. But on a broader kind of look on the economic scale, larger corporations, corporations with unusually high risk are now building their own in-house teams. And so what's fascinating is watching how those teams are inserted into the corporate infrastructure. So it's important that those teams provide not just information, but also expertise to different groups about what they're specialized in. So it's very much a kind of associated with how far along you are on security model track, then you're also going to be higher up on that threat intelligence track.
With all that in mind, how can organizations ensure that they're actually getting the most out of their threat intelligence?
So it has to do with how you metric the teams and also how you structure your organization. So I was having a conversation with a gentleman yesterday from a major financial institution, and I was discussing, well, how are you placed inside of your group? And he was like, oh, well, all we do is write reports. It's difficult to kind of close the loop on incidents to see how we are impacting things. The cybersecurity folks over here are very insular and kind of protective. And so it's important from a CISO perspective or from an executive function that you're really breaking down those walls between organizations, and you're metricing your intelligence organization on how they impact your defenses. So you shouldn't be like, you need to write me 10 reports a month, but you need to be, show me how you've changed how we defend ourselves, and that it's important to have you continue to do the work that you're doing.
Okay. Your team provides intelligence support when dealing with incident response for an organization. How can an organization leverage that intelligence to make their incident response team that much more effective? Right,
so part of our incident response offering is an emergency response offering. So we provide support during the worst days of our customers' professional lives. And so we strive to make sure that the incident responders that are on site working with those partners have the most information, the latest updates on what we've seen elsewhere in the threat landscape, But we also have the intelligence on demand offering, where customers can ask us any kind of question about cybersecurity or geopolitical issues, and we're able to provide back from our experts in Talos, this is how we see this actor you're asking about, or these are the risks associated with this region.
Can you give us an example of how Cisco intelligence was used to respond to a large-scale security event?
So I mean, last summer, for example, we had a customer who had been hit with a pre-ransomware that looked very much like Hive. And so we were able to leverage our previous interactions with the Hive actor and be like, okay, here's what you're going to experience over the next 48 hours. Here are the tools that are going to be used, and here's how you defend against these tactics and techniques that the actors are going to use. And it was kind of a back and forth between the customers, Blue Team, and us, and the actor, trying to get them out of the network. And we eventually made it so problematic for that actor to operate inside that it became difficult for them to do business, and they actually just pulled out of the network with no adverse impact to the customer.
Okay. Ransomware continues to be a top threat, of course. What are your recommendations to organizations to better protect themselves?
Yeah, well, we certainly saw a dip in ransomware operations in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but we're starting to see that kind of tick back up now. Okay. The interesting thing about ransomware is that our recommendations haven't changed since our work with the Ransomware Task Force a couple of summers ago. It continues to be, patch aggressively on the edge, pay attention to how different actors are gaining initial access, put in two-factor authentication, and have a really good and solid backup strategy so that if you are hit, you're able to recover without having to spend money to get keys.
Is the dip that you saw at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, does that suggest anything about the geography of the attackers?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was interesting, right? And we're doing a lot of work in Ukraine defensively. We're supporting over 30 government and critical infrastructure organizations in Ukraine right now. And we're seeing just every different kind of attack. So you might envision, oh, we're going to have this very high-end attack because it's part of this, associated with this kinetic activity. And what we really saw was some ancient malware and like some more recent, and then some custom but obviously very quickly built malware. In our kind of low confidence assessment on that is that Russia kind of recruited some of these actors and distracted them from what they do normally in terms of ransomware activity to just try to pile on attacks in Ukraine. And so there were definitely some sophisticated activities, but just an unusually high volume of what we would call like normal ransomware kind of predecessors and malware.
Anything that you've seen here at the show so far, Black Hat, that has surprised you or maybe even changed your thinking about these kinds of threats?
Yeah, I'm always excited to come to places like Black Hat because I feel very strongly that people are like the key to defense. You're going to see a lot of organizations or vendors be like, here's our new weird blockchain offering, or our machine language will fix your stuff. And we've been hearing about that for, especially on the machine learning front for like over a decade now. And invariably in our work with national security organizations and in our work with organizations that have been affected by incidents, it is invariably the people that make the difference, really. And the skill sets that are there are what ultimately bring about, a secure environment and a good recovery from a potential ransomware operation.
Matt, let's close out with the question of whether ransomware is eradicable.
I think what we've seen is that ransomware kind of gets pushed around inside of the economy. It is currently kind of feeding on, it's kind of always in a race condition with people that are trying to keep up with patching. So we saw Log4j, and then we saw the VMware Horizon stuff, and it was a race between, can you patch this fast enough before the ransomware operators find you? And until we get to the point where we can consistently make it unprofitable for them to not operate, I don't see that changing. And so it has to be, vendors working together to share intelligence. It has to be vendors providing easier to use tools, more visibility into people's environments so they can make the decisions they need to protect themselves.
Matt, thanks for the great perspectives on intelligent levering of threat intelligence. Thanks for joining us today on the Dark Reading News Desk.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We've been talking with Matt Olney of Cisco. This has been Terry Sweeney for the Dark Reading News Desk.